So it's been 8 months since the Nintendo Switch 2 changed the handheld landscape, and 1 week since Crimson Desert set a new bar for open world fidelity. With over 3 million copies sold in its launch window, Pearl Abyss has a massive hit on their hands, but so far, Pywall remains locked behind the doors of PC, PS5, and Xbox. Today we're going to be looking at cold hard data. Now that we know exactly how the Black Space engine scales across modern hardware, we're answering the big one. Is a native Nintendo Switch 2 port actually coming, and how would it hold up against the versions that we're already playing? So let's start with the current floor for the game, which is the Xbox Series S. Since launch, the Series S version has been the subject of intense scrutiny. It runs at a locked 30 FPS, often dipping its internal resolution as low as 720p during heavy combat in the Abyss. The Switch 2, while technically a lower wattage device, has a massive architectural advantage: NVIDIA DLSS. While the Series S relies on FSR upscaling, which many players have noted looks a bit shimmery in this particular game, the Switch 2 could theoretically use its dedicated tensor cores to reconstruct a 540p image into a clean 1080p. In handheld mode, that would actually result in a sharper looking experience than the Series S on a 4K TV. The Black Space engine is hungry for GPU cycles, but DLSS is the ultimate equalizer. A lot of people asked, why didn't they just put this on PlayStation 4? Well, now that we're seeing the final game, the answer is painfully obvious. Crimson Desert is a systems-driven game. The way wind affects the environment, the procedural destruction of buildings during boss fights, and the sheer number of independent AI routines would have melted the PlayStation 4's Jaguar CPU. Looking at the PlayStation 5 version, which uses every bit of that modern Zen 2 processor, it's clear the PS4 was never an option, but the Switch 2 is not using 2013 tech. The Switch 2, however, is a different beast. With its 8-core ARM CPU and modern memory, it's got the brains to handle the logic of Crimson Desert. It might not have the raw bandwidth of a PlayStation 5, but it is light years ahead of the last gen consoles. This is not just about graphics, it's about the game actually being able to run without the systems collapsing. The real challenge for a potential Switch 2 port is the memory bottleneck. Crimson Desert is a RAM hog, recommending 16GB on PC. The Switch 2's 12GB is plenty for most games, but for Pywall's seamless world, Pearl Abyss would need to get creative. We'd likely see a heavier reliance on the Switch 2's UFS storage. While not as fast as the PlayStation 5's custom storage, it's a massive upgrade over the original Switches. To make this work, we would see more aggressive asset streaming and perhaps slightly lower resolution textures, but the core seamless experience would remain intact. So where does that leave us? Based on the way Crimson Desert has been optimized for the Series S, a Switch 2 port is not just possible, it's probable. The hardware is there, the DLSS tech is there, and the market certainly is there. Pearl Abyss has been quiet about a Nintendo release, but with the Switch 2's install base growing every single day, it feels like only a matter of time before we see a definitive edition for the handheld. But there is one more system, another handheld that people often compare to the Nintendo Switch 2, even though the Switch 2 blows it out of the water, in my opinion, of course. And that, of course, is the Steam Deck. If you've been following the community benchmarks since Crimson Desert launched last week, you know that the vibe is kinda complicated. People wanted this to be the Steam Deck killer app, the game that proved Valve's hardware could handle anything. But Pywall is a different beast entirely. Currently on the Steam Deck, Crimson Desert is struggling to stay above water. Even on low settings with FSR 3.1, the Steam Deck is hovering between 18 and 24 frames per second. In the starting area of Quiden, it is kind of passable, but the moment you hit a major settlement like Hernand, the frame pacing falls apart. So why is this happening? Well, it's the CPU bottleneck. Crimson Desert is not just a pretty game, it's a simulation. The Black Space engine is calculating real-time wind physics on every blade of grass, complex AI routines for every mercenary in a 50-man camp, and procedural destruction that actually matters. The Steam Deck's Zen 2 processor, which, let's remember, is tech from a few years back, simply cannot keep up with the logic overhead. You can lower the resolution all that you want, but the CPU doesn't care about pixels. It cares about instructions, and right now it's drowning in them. Then there's the visual cost. To get those 24 frames, you have to use heavy, and I mean heavy, upscaling. On a 7 or 8 inch screen, FSR at ultra performance makes the world of Pywell look like a moving oil painting. Even The Witcher 3 on Nintendo Switch 1 looks better than this. The fine detail on a cliff's armor, the sharpness of the mountain ridges, it all turns into a blurry, shimmering mess. This is where the Switch 2 conversation becomes so fascinating. The Switch 2 has been out for 8 months now, and we've seen what the Nvidia chip can do. While the Steam Deck relies on brute force and FSR, the Switch 2 uses DLSS 3.5. This is a game changer for Crimson Desert. DLSS uses AI reconstruction to make a lower resolution image look native. If the Switch 2 can run this game at a base 540p, DLSS can make it look like a crisp 1080p. The Steam Deck just doesn't have that magic hardware to clean up the image. Furthermore, we have to look at memory bandwidth. Crimson Desert loves fast RAM. The Steam Deck uses RAM that was great for 2022, but the Switch 2's RAM provides the extra bandwidth needed for the Black Space engine's massive asset streaming. When you're riding a dragon across the plains of Akuman, the Steam Deck stutters because it can't pull data off the SSD and through the RAM fast enough. So where does that leave Steam Deck owners? So as of this week, the consensus is the Steam Deck has finally met its match. This game was built for the next generation of handheld architecture, the kind of tech that we're seeing inside the Nintendo Switch 2. It's the first time in a long time where portable does not just mean compromised, but it requires hardware that was not possible 3 years ago. The Steam Deck gave us the dream, but the Switch 2 might be the one to actually deliver the reality of Pywell in our pockets. So what do you think? Is 20 FPS on the deck playable for you? Or are you waiting for the optimized Nintendo Switch 2 release? If they release it, let me know down in the comments below. That is going to be it for this video. I'm SwitchPlayed. Done.